I wouldn't be surprised if most of you are already familiar with this book called The Practical Australian Motorist Illustrated. It's so prevalent even many decades later. In 1953, the Herald and Weekly Times in Melbourne, the Daily News in Perth, the Sunday Sun in Sydney, and the Courier Mail in Brisbane published the text, The Practical Australian Motorist Illustrated, edited by the motor enthusiast and author Donald Kingsley Thompson. It was a 136-page hardcover book that contained a detailed array of three-dimensional color illustrations depicting the inner workings of automobiles. And that's actually what even drew me to it in the first place, these amazing illustrations. In the preface, Thompson puts forth the aim of the publication. He states, quote, "Let us take a car to pieces in our mind's eye and fit it all together again. Let us just find why everything is there and just how everything works," unquote. Unlike other motorist magazines focused on the specific interests of enthusiasts, the Practical Australian Motorist Illustrated presented a didactic approach to the Australian public, explaining the workings of automobiles so that Australian citizens could make educated decisions in purchasing one, as well as fulfill the expected responsibility of maintaining and repairing it themselves. This book is of particular instance since its production and widespread distribution throughout Australia assisted in establishing what John Ury, the main topic a couple of years ago of this conference, described as, quote, "the system of automobility." This paper attempts to dissect and examine Thompson's book against this theoretical framework within the history of technical communication and demonstrate how it attempted to educate an entire populace by eliminating the mystery behind this epic machine and contribute to exerting what Ury describes as a character of domination. It also is it presents an exemplary text which clearly puts forth both the private and the public responsibility of car ownership. So the book was written by noted sportsman Donald Kingsley Thompson, known as DKT. Thompson served as a pilot in the Royal Australian Air Force before becoming a writer. He was a journalist and an editor for the Melbourne Herald newspaper and entered motorsport as a racing driver and a trials competitor. Memorialized as a member of the Australian Motorsport Hall of Fame, Thompson is perhaps most noted as one of the co-creators and honorary Secretary General of CAMS, the Confederation of Australian Motorsport, founded in 1953. The Practical Australian Motorist Illustrated consists of 9 main chapters, with the first 3 explaining how the engine, transmission, and ancillary systems such as electrical and fuel systems operate. Chapter 4 informs the reader on what to look for when purchasing a car, and Chapter 5 is an explanation of how to drive a car from starting the engine to mitigating traffic problems. Chapter 6 and 7 instruct the automobile owner on the maintenance and troubleshooting key issues, with Chapter 8 demonstrating how to best set up a home garage to store and service the car. The final section, titled The Law and the Motorist, is a 1-page warning that all Australian drivers are required to take out third-party insurance. So the information gathered for the Practical Australian Motorist Illustrated appears to be collected from automotive manufacturer manuals, as some of the illustration lists the car brand itself in the caption. This collaging of material from a variety of existing sources was a similar tactic used by noted engineering technical writer Victor Paget for a series of books for Henley's catalog, specifically the Practical Books for Practical Men series. Like Paget, Thompson thanked a number of automobile manufacturers and dealers in the preparation of the book, which included General Motors Holden, Austin Distributors, Lanes Motors, Ford Motor Company of Australia, Cheney, Regent Motors, among others. The preface, which does not list an author but speaks about the author of the book in third person, so it's not Thompson, but it sets out the intention of the publication, claiming that the motor car is part of the backcloth of the Australian scene, quote, stating, whether it whether it be a sleek sedan sparkling under the hose on a Sunday morning in the suburban backyard, or a hard-working vintage model cooling off under the scant shade of a gum tree in the outback, unquote. This passage is preceded by a full-page photo, as you can see here, of a picturesque landscape with 3 women and a child having what looks like a tailgate picnic beside their car out in the Australian country. The image reminds the reader of the freedom that the automobile had afforded the average citizen, expanding the amount of territory one could exist in with the speed and convenience of cars, and one that was linked to leisure rather than the drudgery of work. This is a factor of expanded freedom and boundaries, and is one of the 6 points that Uri defines as being a, quote, specific character of domination in establishing a system of automobility. This image, which serves as a sort of frontispiece, demonstrates the quasi-private form of mobility of that car, which has surpassed other types of transportation, such as walking, cycling, and public transportation. In this manner, the automobile system has reorganized the ways in which people organize their work and domestic lives. On purchasing a car, Thompson also reminds the reader that, quote, the prospective owner is buying a mechanical contrivance, which is expected to do a lot of hard work. Whether the car stands in the garage or it is in its element on the open road, the driver has 2 responsibilities. One is to the fine example of engineering ability, which has become his property, and the one to the other users of Australia's busy roads, unquote. So on to the organization of the book. As you can see, the contents on the left. And also for the sake of time, I will not go deeply into every section, but delve into a few factors which demonstrate the book's successful tactics in communicating technical information to a general public, also communicating the private responsibilities that are expected, and then also the topic which has an immediate urban implication. So the first 3 chapters are dedicated to explaining how a car works and its major components, such as engine, ancillary systems, and power transmission. It is within this third part of the book that the reader encounters the most striking aspect, which is the amount and the type of detailed illustrations. There are about totaling over 100 different types of illustration. Some are borrowed illustrations from other car manuals, not patent drawings, which often appeared in automotive publications. And these images also are complex graphics of the engine and other components, and ghosted and perspectival views and sectional views, many in color combined with diagrams. For example, some of the first images are of a Ford console. This image here was also the engine of a Ford console, showing a perspectival and proportional section, followed by a ghosted drawing showing the component parts and the relationship to the chassis of the body and placing the various parts of the engine. This was soon followed by another example, which uses a board and back clutch assembly to show an exploded illustration of a gearbox and clutch. Just here's some other, and here is one of the few examples where he's citing specific car models. This one is the 1953 Rover 75, which Thompson claims that car was one of the most successful post-war English designs. In the ancillary section, he also features a 2-page spread of a partial section of an Austin 6-cylinder overhead engine with its accompanying engine parts. And in the later sections, in the art of driving, maintenance and service, and looking for trouble, he features step-by-step photographs are used. And as you can see here, with explanations in the captions. And also in buying a car, Thompson uses tables to compare models. So this is also, I guess, a study in how to communicate different types of information, again, for a general public, not for expertise or discipline. In the section, The Art of Driving, this is where we begin to understand the audience of the book. While reviewing the initial technical sections of the book, one may assume that the book was for the man of the house. However, it is this section which reveals that the book was perhaps intended for the entire family, to both the initiated to car driving and those that are new. We know that in this section, explanation of how to drive a car includes images of women at the wheel. Using a series of photographs, this woman demonstrates the proper posture of the driver, the relaxed way to hold the wheel, and the positioning of the hands from the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock position. Also, the positioning of the feet and using the clutch. But also in this same chapter, but later on, you can see there's the arm of a man, which demonstrates the proper use of hand signals. So in this last chapter on the home garage, this is just some other diagrams and drawings. But this is the last chapter, which I think is the most interesting in terms of urban implications. This would have the most obvious physical implication on Australian urbanism and domestic space, as it responds to the question of how and where to store the car. It is not enough to responsibly service and maintain the machine, but it would also require its own space. This in turn would create a new architectural typology based solely on the car, which would become an expected amenity to what was to be understood in defining the ideal Australian household. Thompson notes that the home garage is one of the first requirements for the owner who wishes to look after the car and prolong its life and appearance in showroom condition, pointing out that this edifice was necessary to protect it from weather, extremes of temperature, particularly sun, birds, vandalism, and theft. The ideal garage would be a private lock type, and where that was not possible, at least a roof or a carport would suffice. The size of the garage would be ample to permit, firstly, all doors to be open while the car was inside, and secondly, to allow work to be performed on the car from any side or end. The book specified that the garage should include a concrete floor, electric light, running water, plenty of ventilation, and if possible, Thompson suggested a pit in the concrete floor of the garage to work under the car. And then when that wasn't necessary, you could also have these ramps. The ideal dimensions, and they're empirical, was and depicted in a mini plan, was that it would include a car park, and the workshop area would be 16 feet wide by 20 feet long. In addition to storing the car, the garage would need space for a workbench, storage area for tools, illuminated artificial, specifically fluorescent lighting, as well as natural light, and the tools included a whole range of different vices, clamps, and spanners. And this would begin, while it's not specifically stated, it's implied that this would definitely also a gendered space, mostly of the beginning of the man cave. He does say that there really shouldn't be anything else in this space, just stuff for the car and the tools and the workbench, nothing else, not a storage space. So in conclusion, what is the significance of this publication? As a historic document, it provides a snapshot of a moment in Australian history when, at the time of publication, there were over 1 million cars in the country and 2 million registered drivers in Australia. So the automobile was still a novel machine to a large part of the society, as the book contains rather didactic sections describing basic car driving skills and operations. Following the trend in automobile manual writing, and in order to avoid rejection by Australian men, the book did not have a tone of authority and did not demand reading, but merely attempted to acquaint Australians with all things related to the automobile. It functioned as part of establishing John Urie's notion of automobility by describing the responsibilities and values of car drivers, which included that car ownership required an understanding of how exactly the machine and its parts worked, something that we don't find today. It is demonstrated through a series of text and detailed graphics that there was an explanation that the car owner would maintain and repair the car themselves, and part of this included the ability to provide a space for the car, proposing the new typology of the car garage as part of Australian household, complete with the tools to repair the complex machine. As a technical document, the book contains timely, comprehensive descriptions of novel technology that an entire populace had to comprehend. It did this by using profuse illustrations, easy to access information, well-established expertise, and sophisticated employment of task orientation. Similar to the publishing tactics of Victor Paget's automotive and aviation books, Thompson reused manufacturers' materials and methods of organization. He was also able to communicate his novel information effectively because he had both extensive first-hand experience with automobiles, the motocross and motorsport, and his overall familiarity with machines, keeping in mind his RAF experience. Most importantly, this publication can be respectively understood as a supplement guide for Australians to use with the growing urban infrastructure required for using the car, its servicing and maintenance, which would continue to develop over the years. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much.